And just real quickly there, Ted mentioned today that he remembered in his history there as he's making a transformation. Mine was May 20th, 2008. Our CTO got up in front of the whole IT organization and said, we are now going to change our architecture from a single big box architecture to a service-oriented architecture, and we're going to change our project management methodology from traditional PMI-based waterfall to Agile Scrum. And like everybody went, what? We had just won 3 years worth of the Best Health Plan in America awards from the NCQA, National Commission on Quality Assurance. And all of a sudden, I, who had been appointed to head this up, said, oh my goodness, it will be on my watch if anything goes wrong and we lose that status. And quite luckily, we did not in the last years. We're now in our 10th year of being the best health plan in America. And in part because we followed the Agile methodology in a very large program portfolio, which as terms didn't even exist back then. Ted, you've heard, has done a wonderful job with his company at EMC in the last couple of years. In 2008, nothing like that existed. Instead, it was more like a lot of you. We had a couple of teams. What are we going to do? How are we going to train people? How are we going to pull this together? Our analysis showed that it was going to be a 5-year, $100 million, 200-plus project effort. And somehow that all had to be put together in some fashion that could be organized and managed throughout and be agile at the same time and not be over-controlling. We chose that, and I'll just quickly say this and then get off. But we chose to go agile because we knew in the analysis by both our outsourcer, Perot, now Dell Services, and our senior staff realized that following the waterfall methodology could bring us to the end of 5 years with a whole new claims administration system that didn't work. We were replacing our entire infrastructure. I mean, the whole thing was going to be replaced. Huge risk. We couldn't afford that. We had to build, test, respond to market changes. We had to keep going and know that at the end of 5 years and all that money, we had a system that would actually work for the business. So that's what led, basically, to the choice of going Agile, in this case Scrum and some Kanban, in our company. So that's my introduction.
So as a leading question for that, for both you and Ted, so is the investment in terms of cost, time, money, appetite for change more, less, or about what you anticipated?
Well, we were very naive. Let me just start, if you don't mind. We thought, well, we're going to train, and we did. We had 10, I got it organized so that we had 10 initiatives. So we had 10 program product owners appointed and go through training, and we had 10 Scrum Masters trained up, and we thought, we're all set. Now let's start off with 5 pilot teams, right? 4 of them failed. Zap, just like that. But that was a good thing, because one of the good things about the Agile methodology is you rapidly find out what doesn't work. We had one team that succeeded, and you know what? It still runs today, 5 years later, that one team. They're very efficient, they're very effective, and we keep them together on purpose. Now, the other teams we had to reorganize. So one of them failed three iterations in a row, and then we brought in, we said, we don't understand what this is doing to our culture, because we're a very traditional, health plan culture. Very hidebound, very tradition-bound, driven by the state and federal mandates and all that kind of stuff. So we said, this is really challenging our whole culture. So we brought in a cultural change agent, ran 800 employees through that, and then we hired full-time coaches to sit on these initial teams. And this one team, for example, that failed 3 times in a row, got its coach, worked through 3 more iterations, right? So after the 6th, into the 7th, they called in, they had their big demo, as they normally did, but this time they brought out the demo. Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing, CEO, COO, everybody who was worth anything in the company was at this demo, right? And they demonstrated the ability of a sales account person to generate new reports for customers on the fly in 5 minutes, which used to be a 3-week operation. And there was just a huge applause to say, holy smokes, you have delivered what we wanted in this whole year now. So once they really got understanding what it was to build and flow and demo and test and change, they succeeded extremely rapidly, and they maintained their existence for a couple of years as well. Okay. So that our value came in actually showing that you could do this very rapidly, very effectively, and meet the customer need. Up until that point, you could have called us a failure in our transformation.
Gotcha. Ted?
It was more.
Yeah. More of an investment than you anticipated?
Yes, it was.
Oh, I forgot to answer that.
I thought I'd just do some. I thought I'd do something to contrast. But it was more, and it was more for a couple of reasons. Ray and I, when we originally did this, we had targeted a couple of teams, and we were going to pilot it, and then fairly common technique, get them to run well and bring in additional teams. The team was so hungry for a different and new process, and especially Agile, that even though we tried to start out with about 20 people, we had 600 going right away. So we had to jump on it and get the coaching and a lot of it internally that we had provided. But then partnering with Rally and Elias and to bring the coaching in, to bring those teams along, was more than we anticipated. It was more than the budget, but it was necessary. A year later, Ray had been beating the Scaled Agile Framework drum, so once we figured out it was going to be measured in the hundreds, we adopted that, and there was continued investment there, but the key things in terms of the returns, by doing Agile in the beginning, even though the 600 teams came in, and it's a year later, we had great visibility into the programs, which we never had before. So we had immediate return on investment there. And now, as I said, the key return is these quarterly releases that we're on a cadence to deliver. So it was more than I anticipated, but we're seeing benefits sooner on different dimensions than I had anticipated.
Sure. So there was more of an investment that you had to make, but you're seeing a lot of top-line returns in terms of capabilities and things that folks, like you mentioned, as far as the organization, were able to appreciate.
Yes.
Do you find that that's the case with folks that you work with, that there's sort of an underestimation of the investment that's involved?
Absolutely. I think, Agile is unusual in that there's nothing really to compare it to. Going Agile is like going what? Right? So a common thing that people think of is, I went from C++ to Java to .NET or something. It's probably like that. Do some training, hire some people, and we're done. But Agile can be a multi-year journey, which is why I like to focus on all those money slides, because it's generally much more return than people expect. And if you're going to invest for a multi-year program, you better be getting a lot out of it. But as I think both gentlemen that just talked about that said, they got early wins, whether it was visibility or delivery. They got early wins. But really, Agile is much more than 2 days of training and you're done. That's kind of like, I'm going to hike Mount Everest, and I'll take a rock climbing class on the weekend, and I'm good. Right? That rarely ends well.
Yeah, and I just add that regardless of what the financial cost is or what the estimated financial costs are, what I see most often is people underestimate the investment in their attention, right, and the effort that is involved in organizational and cultural change. Some organizations have been successful doing that with relatively modest investments, but regardless of how much you spend, you can't buy Agile. It's not for sale.
Gotcha. There's one of our biggest things was being able to manage the risk. Obviously, we had our whole system, our whole company's existence at risk, a lot of money at risk, and we needed some kind of system that would manage that risk and adapt to change as it came. And boy, did change ever come, right? Obamacare didn't exist then. And all we've been doing for the last 2 years are all the new rules under Obamacare. We had to adjust everything under the sun. So we were able to go 3 years, for example, pretty much according to our program. And then all of a sudden, our top management said, oh, no, we need you to do this instead. Set this aside, adapt, get your teams going, do these things first, save $3 million, don't spend $3 million, we'll net $6 million, and then go back to your schedule. And it gave us that kind of flexibility to do that we simply had not had before that time.
Great. I think this is a question for anyone on the panel, but should data-driven continuous improvement be measured based on the value being delivered and not the quantity of, say, user stories being delivered? How do you think about when you're doing data-driven continuous improvement? What are the things that you're looking for?
So I'll take the first grade. So for us, it's about, we need to measure it on business value delivery. And we actually just went through this as part of the development enablement team. We went through and we have 5 key business metrics: time to market, predictability, quality, visibility, and employee satisfaction. And when we started to derive the metrics for this, one of the things on time to market is we started to say, well, velocity should really be the measure. But then you have to be careful on what you ask for. You know, Ray was, you know, we're sitting in the room, I remember this clearly, and then we said, well, really what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're understanding what the value of each of the deliverables are and make sure that we're delivering the highest value to the market, which does a couple of interesting things. It forces the correct rank ordering, and it forces, and to deliver the value, like the MVP. And then the second thing is it does get you paying attention to the practice execution and the Scrum team and team execution. So, but for us, it's driven by the business value.
But I would say that I see a lot of organizations that get themselves all wrapped around the axle on trying to equate everything to dollars. And there are certain things that we do in an organization that are just devilishly difficult to tie to revenue, even though we all know that they're incredibly valuable. Things like complying with the Affordable Care Act, which allows us to stay in business. Presumably, that's valuable, but tying it directly to revenue is difficult. All measures are imperfect. Understand the imperfections of the proxies you've chosen to measure, and use the measures that will help you understand your organization without huge cost. Right? If it's going to take an enormous amount of effort and create a bunch of political divisiveness by trying to attach dollars to work items, then maybe that doesn't yield sufficient additional insight to warrant the expense.
That was one of the most complicated questions I think I've ever heard.
Congratulations.
I am going to take a shot at what I think the question was. So not a politician's answer, I hope. But so there was a telltale in what he just said, the word proxy there. I highly recommend this book, The Principles of Product Development Flow, 2nd edition. What a weird title. Very interesting book. And one of the things that it points out is this concept of proxies. We often use things that we know how to measure as a proxy for what we'd really like to measure. And unfortunately, in our world, very often, all of our worlds, cost becomes a proxy for delivering value. If I can reduce the cost, I'm probably producing more value. But what happens to that cost reduction on a project that was canceled or shelved, right? So it's only a proxy. Really, by doing that, we're focusing on things that caused all the problems that we have today. The traditional development is all around reducing cost, and the end result of that is your cost goes to 0, which means we're all out of jobs, right? So that's not the greatest thing to be optimizing. And optimizing for dollars is actually impossible. When do you know how much money something is going to create? After, right? And maybe never, because it wasn't actually the software. You guys are smart, but it was really me, the salesperson, right? Or the marketing, or the economy. So there's a lot of things you can measure, but remember that very often they're just proxies.
Yeah.
So what I was talking about was actually not actual outcomes, but looking at your ROI and taking those guesses and changing how you think about it so that whatever value you were guessing you were going to get, you're going to get sooner. So you can look at that. You can look at something, you can look at profits, and if you're delivering frequently, marketing doesn't change, economy doesn't change, but your revenues go up, it probably was the software. You can look at Net Promoter Score. You can then look at business anecdotes. If the business side isn't excited, you're probably doing it wrong. And then the next thing you can look at is your agile maturity, the things that Insight does, some of the things that we can help you with. Because you know what, if you're not doing agile well, all the other stuff will probably never happen. So there you go.
Great. So one of the things that I think that we took away from the presentations is that this isn't simply talking about an engineering discipline, that there's agility that has to touch other parts of the organization, whether it's program management, product management, operations, the business. What are some of the techniques that you folks have implemented that allowed you to spread or help increase the overall agility of those other parts of the organization, and when to assume change the way that you work together? Michael, you want to start?
Well, like I did mention, we brought in a cultural change agent who specializes in doing Agile cultural transformations. And we invited 800 people, or we invited all 1,200 of the company, got 800 to participate in a week-long training. It was a huge investment. That wasn't something we anticipated, but it was necessary. And then we've created an entire Agile Scrum training program for the company. We run it ourselves, and all of the business units are invited to every part of it, but the one that we really want them to go to is called our Agile Boot Camp. And they go to that so that they have an introduction to what it's going to be like when they serve with one of these Agile teams, because you have to have the business involved with the team. They have a lot to do, and they need to know what it is and how it works and everything else like that. They don't get to just come in and do 3 months worth of requirements, walk away, 6 months later come back and do UAT. They got to participate with the team through that entire period of time, and they need to know what to do.
So that was multiple groups?
Oh, yeah.
Just like the engineering folks, but all people that...
All the functional areas of the company, actually.
So I see a lot of groups, a lot of organizations that they want to get the business to help us or to comply or to get on board. And I see that as fundamentally the wrong way to think about or address the problem, because it's still about us. It's about you guys helping us do what we want to do, when it should be about us helping you achieve what you're trying to accomplish. Right? What's in it for me? And so, again, it's about, we in engineering or in IT tend to think about Agile as Scrum and XP and continuous engineering practices. And frankly, as a business owner, I don't care about most of that stuff. What I care about is how am I going to get more product out to my customers? How am I going to learn more about my market segments? What are the things that are going to change in my world that are going to make my life better? And I need to understand some of those details, but only within the context of what I'm trying to accomplish. So to organizational change management, shift your mindset from engineering agility and how does the business help that happen to business agility, and where does engineering fit within that?
So I guess on that what I would say is that, again, it's back to the thought I had about what in Scrum, Kanban, or XP talks about how to work together and going up into the business. And there are some good answers there. But one of the things that happens with Agile development, extreme programming, Scrum, is it all refers to that engineering stuff that we do. So the interesting thing is that Scrum Agile is so different, it can't really succeed in an organization that is purpose-built for traditional development. It's going to get ripped apart, right? How you compensate people, how you do your budget cycle, how you organize people. There's a whole bunch of those things, right? So when I talk to people about Agile over a beer or whatever, usually beer, they say, Damon, that was really interesting, but let me tell you about why it won't work at my organization. We have this problem and that problem, and we don't have the luxury of this and that. And they list out all these things, and Scrum is great, but you can't be on just one team. You need to multitask, all those things that people say. I said them. I'm sure many of you say these things or have. That list, which we think of as set in concrete, those are the things that have to change for Scrum and Agile to be successful. Scrum and Agile, if you started a new company with 10 people, it's easy. You try to change an organization that's purpose-built for traditional into an organization that's purpose-built for Agile, that's hard, but it's worth it.
Very, very hard. Let me just say, really fundamental things change. We changed 2/3 of our conference rooms into team bullpen rooms. What do you think that did to all the business people who used the conference room, right? Huge protest, but they had gotten an education about why it was necessary to create these team rooms in which they would participate. We had to change our accounting and billing system because people's time was accounted for by certain activities relevant to their job role. And the accounting and audit system would say, oh, this BA, they can't charge for doing test case writing, for example. Or this QA person can't charge for writing stories, for example. And all bills would bounce back. So we had to change our accounting and audit system. We had to have new rules with the auditors on what was going to count for being done versus done, what was in actual production versus what was actually in this environment or that environment. So there were some real fundamental structural changes that had to take place to accommodate this. And by the way, I will say, not everybody feels like they're agile at our company now, and not our whole organization is either. We've been through almost over 5 years now. So we're like 25% really good agile Scrum, 50% hybrid, and 25% traditional waterfall. So it's gone from being, we were 80% agile across 75% of the teams up through 2011. And now we've been adjusting to what works best for what we've got.
So for
I want to add on actually another question on top of your answer for this one, which is when you were going through this process and talking with other parts of the organization, what was the initial drive that got this whole thing started for you, and what was the overall time frame? So if you could fold that into your answer, that would be
Sure. It's actually, it was going to be the way I was going to start, so it works. So Agile started for us really at the portfolio management side, and this is the key thing. I think the thing that, if you took a look at the impacts to other organizations, the key thing on that slide that's very different for us when you looked at the organizational structure is that product management is part of that component area team, right? It used to be that product management would be on the outside, come up with a set of rank ordered, it wouldn't even be rank ordered, they were on spreadsheets, and they would toss over a PRD with a set of requirements into engineering, and then they'd step away. And then engineering, the conversations on what the functional requirements were, whatever, typically, they would not get back everything they wanted, and some of what they got back may not have been how they wanted it to work. And so it was very hands-off. It was like, oh, here's a PRD, go ahead, deliver this, we think you should be done, or, can commit to it in 6 months, you come back, you didn't give me what I wanted. So then
what? Then get angry.
Oh, yeah, and get angry, yes, the anger. Yeah. So we started with portfolio management, and we were doing a lot of work where our features were on spreadsheets. So Rally was originally brought in to do portfolio management. And I tell a funny story, but we're probably running late on time. I told it at breakfast. But it started there, and it's good that the seed was planted there, because what happened was when I joined the company, and I came from 12 years of startups before, so I was very focused on driving revenue because it shortens your runway if you're not generating profits, right? So it's lifeblood. So when I came in, I said, oh, okay, well, let's transform the engineering organization, but we need to align it to the business that it's going to deliver. But because the start of it came in through product management, the response message back to bring them in was really welcome, because we showed them how the machinery of the organization could get them what they really wanted in a much more predictable way, with faster time to market, where the requirements were groomed and met, and they got back what they had wanted. So for us, it came in through portfolio management, and that provided the draw for us to pull product management in. And product management now they want to know things like, what is the velocity? What's the velocity of these teams? How much work can I actually give them? How can we strategize? Which is you're setting the teams up for success right from the beginning, because people are paying attention not to wishes and dreams, but to what their actual velocity and how much they can accomplish is.
Was there a key problem that folks wanted to solve? They said, hey, if we can accomplish this, this is kind of the core driver behind this initiative. Was there any one specific thing? You talked about a number of benefits, but just trying to think if there's...
Well, so, we had started, it was the Kitty Hawk initiative. So wow, that was interesting. I think that, we wanted velocity, visibility, and quality was how the Kitty Hawk initiative went out. And really I'll tell this anecdotally. So we weren't having a lot of success with delivering products on time. And so that was the key thing. And then when additional feature and function requirements were put on engineering, and engineering was like, well, we can't get to that, we weren't in a defensible position to show them where everybody was and what value they were delivering now. So one, we wanted velocity, visibility, and quality to come out. But the second thing is, from engineering, we needed to have a practice and a framework where we could respond and say, hey, we're working on these in the right backlog order. This is the capacity you've assigned, and we're doing these. If you want to push something in, something's going to have to fall out and be in that defensible position.
Basically enabling that conversation to happen.
Right.
I think, as you were suggesting, in my experience, there's almost always some sort of a burning building that initiates this. Just wanting to be agile rarely results in anything other than some lip service running a few trainings. But there's a big rebuild of the infrastructure, or there's the Kitty Hawk program, or in my case, I built a sales enablement platform for a healthcare company that people were coming to you and said, we failed at this 4 times, I need you to fix it. Yep. And you're then given the authority to say, I'll fix it for you, but here's what I need. Mm-hmm. And we're going to do it this way. And once you then get that permission to actually do it, that's where getting people on board, because nothing sells like success.
So given that, what is an example of a metric that you would use for seeing whether or not you're doing Agile well, or Agile is doing well for you?
So I always focus on how Agile is doing for us, not on how well we're doing Agile. So the goals of the organization, the goals of the initiative that you've been charged with, the goals of the program that you're driving are the goals of the Agile transformation. So did we deliver on time? Were we able to deliver the product that we intended to? Were we able to transition from the existing platform to the new platform by the desired date, when everybody agrees that was not going to happen otherwise? And then once you have that, then you can start to sell all the other benefits that come from this. And we have visibility, and I can take on another one, and my quality is higher than any of those. But if you're not delivering on the business objectives, the rest of it's just well executed failure.
And I'd agree. So the 2 sides of it are, did the organization as a whole, based on its strategy, commit through our PSI commitment that people felt that they had a good commitment? It was based on capacity, it was based on dependency, it was based on the analysis through PSI commitment. And the second part is right to Isaac's point. It's about delivery. After that commitment, did we get it done at the end of the PSI? Mm-hmm. And so the first part, that red box that I drew that said this is the key and the crux part of it, really aligned everybody to the expectations and pulled in product management and engineering. So we solved how we were going to apply the money together for the defined content. But our measure now is, are we delivering up against that commitment, right? And so the last 2 quarterly releases.
I think at a high level, a lot of metrics or way of looking at things, or expected values or benefits of Agile, or really anything, sound like it tastes better, right? So that's great. It tastes better. Cool. But I think at the end of the day, really it has to deliver. Agile to be successful, or anything to be successful, at the end of the day is, are you delivering the highest value things faster, right? And the highest value things at any particular point in time. Not what you thought was valuable a year ago that turned out, once you put it out to the customer, had 0 value, but finding out what the highest value things are. And you can't do that with yearly releases. And it's, even if you look at quarterly releases, which is a fantastic achievement, what could you find out with monthly releases if it's appropriate within your context? So it's really, at the end of the day, if you're not delivering the highest value things at the moment, whether you know it or not, learn it or not, faster, then what would be the point? Everything else comes out of that. Like, wouldn't you rather be at a company that's more viable because they're making more money, right? So it's going to be a little bit more relaxed, more opportunity, more growth, more viability. All the other stuff kind of falls out from, are you doing that or not?
How do you advise your customers when you get started with them, when you're just having those initial conversations, to set themselves up for success? What are some of the discussions you have?
Well, first, I show the money slides, right? That's the carrot. And then I show them the stick, which is how you fail if you don't take it seriously, right? So I think hopefully from these 2 gentlemen, you've learned that it probably is going to cost more and take longer than you thought. And hopefully one of the things that we've all helped to express is that there's probably also more value than perhaps you expected. And you can get that value fairly rapidly over time.
We have a couple of different measures that we thought over time, and some evolved and some we thought of in the beginning. We had, after 4 years, we had started migrating onto our new platform. And in healthcare, when health plans migrate onto new platforms, they have about a 90% failure rate. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. And we knew that, right? That's a history of that. But after 4 years, when we had finally gotten over half of everything migrated onto the new platform, the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing called a special meeting with the IT and Operations Department. And he said, you know what, guys, I have to tell you, We have had 0 customer complaints in this migration of 1 million members. He said, that isn't heard of. That never happens. So we had a quality assessment there from our marketplace saying we didn't screw it up, if you will. And we did it well enough that we weren't getting flooded with all sorts of calls. But we also did other things, like we changed. We went from the quarterly kind of release schema down to monthly. And when we got to monthly, in the beginning, I'll say in our first year, we had 10% promotion failures. That is, a feature or a component or whatever would go into the production workspace and fail for some reason. And we're currently at less than 1%. Wow. We're, in fact, at 1/2 to 1/3 of 1%. Wow. So we get 1 out of 200 or 300 components that might fail. So that's a huge quality improvement from our own standpoint, from our external customers, and then from our internal functional departments. We actually survey them now, all the product owners and business sponsors. We say, what did you think of XYZ? Did we deliver what you wanted? Blah, 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 blah. And now our average rating on that is 4.5 out of 5, when it used to be around 3.
So you're measuring the statistics around the keep doing it. What is the engagement? What is the
Are we satisfying the customer, our external customer, our internal customer, and our departments?
Gotcha. One of the questions is around scale. When talking about scale, how do you normalize from different groups so that if you're trying to roll things up or you're trying to do measures of how different groups are going, how are you finding ways so that the data makes sense as you roll it up? That it's kind of apples and apples, that, I don't know, that 5 points for this team doesn't mean 13 points for this team or 120 points for that team. So you get a sense of, hey, we're going to finish on time, or hey, we're on track or we're off track.
Well,
into the group.
I mean, so you have to normalize if you want to be able. You have to align on a common unit of measure, an exchange rate, if you will. And if you're going to use the size of work items, you either align on a common point value scale, or you use the story count concept, or you come up with a velocity-based way of normalizing the story points into a common metric, which I need a whiteboard in order to explain how we do that, but ultimately you have to come up with a way.
Isn't traditional advice not to do that? That every team should have their own scale?
Yeah, it is. But you know what? If you want to be able to run your organization, I need a common unit of measure. There are other ways other than using the same story point method, right? So if you really believe strongly that teams should have their own story point number, and my 13 is equivalent to your 20 is equivalent to your 200, great. And at the business level, I need to be able to roll that data up. So how are we going to do that?
So this might be a good point to explain a very confusing thing that some of you may see happening up here. This may seem off topic for one moment, but bear with me. So how many people, I heard
Squirrel.
How many people think that you can install voting machines and result in democracy? Right? It's the exact same thing with Scrum. You can't install Scrum and get Agile. So the interesting thing about Agile is it's a lot like democracy. There is no such thing as standardized democracy, right? The way the French do it, the Germans do it. I mean, it's not as well as we do it, obviously, but right? It's different, right? So you may have heard some competing or conflicting things coming from us, but we're all talking about Agile. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it. There's a lot of different ways to slice that cat, but at the end of the day, we're all Agilists, if you will. And that can be very confusing for somebody that's getting started, because it's like, if we're talking about Java, and I talk about a different standard, people will be like, well, isn't there a standard way to do Java? Yes, there is, but this is not like that. What was the original question?
Rolling up and normalizing.
Rolling up and normalizing. Oh, yeah, because I'm going to say something that sounds like it conflicts. So the whole thing about normalizing is a very difficult topic, right? Because one of the things it's asking you to do is to take this team that has 4 people on it doing .NET with that team over there that has 10 people doing Java. How do you compare those two, right? It doesn't necessarily make sense. But at the end of the day, to run a business, you need something. So there are a lot of ways to do it. One way that I like is to use iterations. Mm-hmm. So if you have 10 teams, it doesn't matter their iteration length. let's say summer 2 and summer 4, you can just say we're going to use an iteration in this case to mean 2 weeks. So for a 4-week iteration, that would be 2 iterations, from this normalizing way. So if you have 10 teams, you've got 10 iterations worth of time, then that's 100 iterations of work you're going to get from those 10 teams over that period of time. So you can say that for me to ship, I need to hit 100 iterations of work. How many iterations of work have I got done? You would think, well, every week you got 10 done? Nah. Some teams are going to fail. So you got 9 that week. Then you got 8. Then somehow you got 11, which is a strange thing, but it can happen. Right? So there are ways to normalize. What makes sense to you is going to be completely context-driven.
And what you just described is what I wanted a whiteboard in order to be able to do. So very, very well done. If you've got story points within your team and you've got velocity, you can divide story points for an item by your velocity and get to a portion of an iteration that represents. And so you can say how many ideal iterations, or whatever term you choose to use, across many teams. You can even take that team's run rate. That team costs us $50,000 per iteration to run, and it's going to cost us a half of an iteration for this work item. So that's a $25,000 unit of work that you can aggregate across all those teams in order to get the financial cost of those products.
And so we're doing something a little different approach, right? So
yeah, great.
So we started off using ideal days, and so typical to Mike Cohn, one reason why we started it is it's a lot easier concept for a team to grok in terms of estimation, in terms of ideal days, than apples and bananas and watermelons, or elephants and giraffes. But so the ideal days is one aspect of it. But the second thing is, if you're going to use ideal days and you want to normalize, you have to make an investment in terms of the estimation accuracy of the teams. So you can't just lay out ideal days, because then different teams, someone may say this is going to take me, 10 days, and another person can say 5, and however long they achieve it in, their velocity is going to reflect that. But so we do the ideal days, and then we're really pushing on the estimate accuracy, looking at your plan estimate versus your task estimate versus your actuals. Because if you can get the estimates to converge to, and there's no perfect math here, to the ideal days, then you can have a basis for normalization of teams coming together if everybody's converging toward a single unit of measure.
Just to continue on this, because this is great, and some of you may have noticed that one of my favorite pastimes is tweaking the scrummies. So people who are very hardcore Scrum, I love to mess with their assumptions. But if you're dealing with something as large as Kitty Hawk, right? There are work items that are part of Kitty Hawk that we have in the plan that we're going to do that are ill-defined, but we're going to do them. And we may not be planning on doing them for 6 months, 12 months, and they're huge, right? They're going to involve multiple component teams as well as multiple teams within those teams. And I know that a lot of people say those who do the work plan the work, but I'm not going to have 300 people that are involved in 30 different teams breaking that huge work item down into story level detail so I can get story point estimates of something that I may never do that's going to be 12 months out.
Right.
But I still need a sizing, and I need to have a common unit in which to have somebody else, perhaps an architect or a development lead, to be able to size that thing. And that's not good agile, team level agile dogma, but it's a need that we have as an organization.
Are there times you don't use Agile?
Yeah. We have some things that are strictly waterfall. If we're installing servers and there's a whole sequence of tasks and steps in order to get that done, why do you need to be agile? There's not any risk involved. You know all the steps involved. You need to execute the steps in a certain way, in a certain timeline. You do it, it's done, end of project. So, I mean, that's a simple one, right? But there are other things that we have had in the past, like in our what's called insurance products. When you create an insurance product, you have to specify benefits, network, all sorts of things have to be specified. So we have a long, long, long sheet of what's required in order to create a product, right? And so they have that checklist of all the things. Have they done this, and this? When they've done all of them, they've got a product. So again, there's almost no risk there. There's no software development per se. They might have to engage other teams to modify something in some application, but they're going through this long list of things that represent the creation and installation of a quote-unquote insurance product in the system. So it's quite different. It's not the same as doing something experimental software that's got a lot of risk, a lot of unknowns, and everything else like that. If it's all known, what do you have to experiment with? Nothing. Execute your steps.
So I would say it depends on what your definition of Agile is. Not quite like somebody else that said something similar to that. But if you look, so what is Agile? How many people here have read the 12 principles? So almost everybody. There's actually, the manifesto, it's that thing that says interactions and individuals, but forget about process and tools. Sorry. No, it doesn't say that. It says process and tools are important, but individuals and interactions at the end are more important. So actually, Agile is not iterations. It's not Scrum. It is anything that supports the principles and values of the Agile Manifesto, although I feel queasy every time I say that word, manifesto. But if you go and look step by step, when you go back, I suggest take a look at each value and principle and say, do you agree with it or not, right? And whether you're doing waterfall or not, it's really not an and or. Like, how many people don't believe it's a good idea to reflect on what you've done in the past and change your future behavior? Oh, you don't? Okay. We got to talk later. I think you need to change that behavior. But, right, so you can be agile thinking and act agile even within a waterfall project. So it really depends on how you think about it.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I saw a survey, for example, that said when you say agile, 84% of the respondents are thinking Scrum.
Yes.
So it's, and Scrum's the actual technique methodology for execution, and Agile is the philosophy, and that's completely different.
When there are many techniques that are consistent with that philosophy.
That's correct.
That process that you're describing is perfect candidate for Kanban and would benefit greatly from taking that waterfall approach and making it visual, reducing your work in progress, maximizing your throughput, et cetera, which I know you do.
Yeah, and we do Kanban as well. There are certain things that are much better Kanban style than Scrum style.
Any additional thoughts on that?
Well, the hardware side is certainly run waterfall. I'd say when we took a look at our platform team that brings up new chips or whatever like that, they really had, it's almost like you said, they had a very regular project plan that they executed. And originally there was a lot of resistance because like, hey, we know what we're doing, we know the set of steps we're going to do. Recently they've taken on Agile, more for the reasons of the investment level in the Scrum teams and some of the mobility, some of the other aspects of it that they had. And then our back-end cycle testing, when we're done at the end of a PSI, there's a QE organization that puts the whole system up on the arrays and runs cross-feature testing and system testing. Mm-hmm. In some sense, you can, the Agile Manifesto, a discussion was worthwhile because they actually do run iterations. They specify it in terms of a number of 2-week cycles, and then they determine how many cycles they actually need to run based on the complexity of the PSI content being delivered to them. So, and just yesterday I was having the conversation where he was saying, well, geez, we got multiple programs. I really have to figure out my capacity. Can you help me be agile? So at either end of our spectrum, in the middle, we're predominantly agile across the teams. Hardware is waterfall, and then I think we're in transition on the quality end.
Yeah, that actually leads to one of the next questions, and I think it's probably something that there's some definition. The question is, what are some of the best practices? What is some advice around remote teams? And I think when you think of any organization that's working at scale, remote has a lot of possible connotations. You could have a team that is totally together in a remote location. It could be split up, or you have different pieces of the organization that some have to coordinate, and you're of a size that you're fundamentally remote. What are some of the best practices that you've seen from managing that remote development environment when you have to work together towards an overarching delivery?
Avoid it. I'm actually not kidding. When we did the organization, we actually, and I mentioned the statistics, somewhere in between 3 and 4 different geographic locations on the Scrum teams. What we basically said was, we're okay as long as there's time zone, a predominant good portion of time zone overlap.
Okay.
But what we did do is we spent a lot of time when we were forming the teams, and especially the component area teams, and absolutely to the law of the Scrum team, that we wanted them, co-located at least on the time zone. So we have an RTP facility, so you could have people on a Scrum team from RTP and Hopkinton. Yep. But you wouldn't find a team with someone in Hopkinton in China. Gotcha. And we went through that exercise, and I think that's working quite well. So I'd recommend it as a best practice. I think it's just so difficult to not have the overlap. We actually, even though I'm saying this, in the dev enablement team, we do have a China organization, but our teams are so small, we can't just have and it's just hard to align with them, to have the continued development, the grooming, the retrospectives. It just becomes difficult, so I'd rather just avoid it.
Gotcha.
So what do you mean by co-location? So co-location is a misleading word. We're all co-located, but we could be individual teams. It doesn't co-location in Agile doesn't necessarily mean that we all in a program are in the same place. It could be that table's in China, that table's in India, this table is here, that table's in San Jose, et cetera, et cetera. But as individual cross-functional teams, you're co-located. Mm-hmm. Then there's another aspect of co-location, which is co-located team. How many teams can you be co-located on at the same time? One, right? So one of the things that's pointing out is work on one team. If you're a team member of 5 teams, you're not on any teams, right? It's like if the people on the Red Sox played for that other team down south there, right? That wouldn't be a team. That would be a bunch of people moving back and forth. A team is a group of people working towards a common practice. So if you can't get to physical co-location, if you can get to individuals only working on one team, that's a really great step.
And that's a super challenge to us, anyhow, because we're outsourced, as I said, and outsourcing means they also like to use the least expensive possible resource for any given project, which means people get assigned elsewhere, like in India or Pakistan or whatever it happens to be. Plus, we have 2 other sites of our own. So what we've done is we have project backlogs or product backlogs that get split up so that the remote team has its own portion of the backlog. So they operate on that as their own team, and they deliver it to the larger size team. The business of time zones and all that is just too horrific on people's psyches and their physical state of being. So we actually give them, and they give and get their own, and then they run it. We have to go over there, and we have to train them so that they actually are executing the way that we would like them to execute. There was a second part, though, to what you were saying, too, though.
That I was saying?
The last one, yeah.
If you can't be physically co-located.
So very often, if you do have a contracted outsource agent of some kind, they like to make sure their people are 100% allocated, right? So if they seem to think somebody's only going to be on this team for 50%, then they want to stick them on another team for 50%. We had to go through a complete evaluation of all of their 800 outsourced resources in 1 month period of time and reorganize all of the projects and teams that we had because it was becoming inefficient.
Dedicated teams.
And we had to get them as many as possible to one team only. We only got about half. And then we got about another third that got on 2 teams, and the remainder were 3. Now those remainders, some of them it makes sense. Do you want to have a full-time architect on a team dedicated 100% to one team? No, an architect actually can do work with multiple teams in the same program, for example, right?
Yes.
And there are other people who do specialized work like that can time slice. So you have to be careful about being totally arbitrary about it, because there are some places where it's useful, other places it's not.
To the extent you can.
Right.
Now, if only the data supported it.
Yeah. and we only have about 5 minutes, but I think this is a related question, which is interesting. So one of the things talked about is the value that you can provide by organizing in this way. Is that ability so you're not moving individuals around. You're not putting individuals on 5, 10 teams, right? You're taking teams, and if there's a decision that a piece of functionality, a program is more important than another one, and you're going to move teams rather than moving people around, how do you create the subject matter expertise that allows for that to be possible? Or what is the dynamic where that looks? Are you taking the teams and you're saying, we were putting 5 teams on this one and 2 teams on this one, and now we want to shift, and we're going to move these 2 over here to actually focus on that? Is there a subject matter expertise loss, or how do you How do you manage that process?
And so we've done a couple of, it's a hard problem. One is the forward-looking roadmap and understanding how the epics are going to manifest over the roadmap. When we were working with the senior directors on the team, that was one of the key values of being able to look ahead to if you were going to need increased capacity, what kinds of training and cross-training and skill acquisition would you need to provide to people so that you could be prepared by the time you got there. But what we had done is also provided communities of practice. So like the guilds that are in there. Yeah. And so if you were going to move a team from one place to another one, you would have a set of experts that could go and help them actually do that. And the last case was we just said, look, if it was really a fundamentally different area where they weren't there, they just had to account for that in their velocity and that there was ramp-up time. But we tried to get out ahead of it. If we couldn't get out ahead of it, then we brought in the communities of practice, and if we couldn't do either of those, then we would just need to account for a slower velocity when they first get going.
So we had some conversations about this during the break. Moving away from a project-oriented way of organizing, where every team is designed around the work that's currently standing before them, is a huge part of that, because a lot of projects require just a vast span of technical and business domain knowledge. And when you move to more of a component team-based model, where each team has a span of control and has the level of expertise within a certain area, and are able to then flow that project work to the appropriate team or teams to do the work based upon the needs of the project, you satisfy a lot of that challenge of my team doesn't have everything it needs to do this project, therefore I need to borrow 5% of Joe. Well, no, that small portion of that project flows to Joe's team. And there's a dependency there, and we manage that at the program and the portfolio level.
It's definitely a hard problem. I mean, if you think about it, you have a certain way of doing things now, and if you move people from place to place because they're the only experts, you're going to have a hard time growing new experts. Most people, maybe this is wrong, but most people, I think, don't really enjoy doing the same exact thing over and over again forever. They want to learn new things. So while it's a hard problem to solve, the more of it that you do, the more capability and bench strength and cross-training you grow, the more options you have. So it doesn't mean it's not a panacea or a silver bullet, but it gives you more options and more flexibility. And while it is an investment, right, we're really not talking about reducing costs or saving money by making people more efficient. Yes, we are talking about saving money, but it's by getting the things that value out there sooner and not doing the things that, as it turns out, don't have value. That's a cost savings, right? So a lot of this is about, yes, it's a difficult problem, but it's going to give you more and more options, more and more capability as you go forward and start getting these capabilities. And one thought that occurs to me, you started in 2008? Yeah. When did you guys start?
2012.
Yeah, you don't want to be the last people on the Agile bus, right? You just don't want to be there.
It's tough being first, too.
Yeah.
One of the things that we learned, and we had to help Dell do this more, Pro originally, but is start thinking in terms of assigning work to teams and teams to projects, and projects to programs. So that if there is, in fact, a necessary split like an architect, they can stay like within a program because they're working across 3 projects and 5 teams. But it's all the same domain of knowledge and expertise that's needed. All that's really changed is who they're accounting for their time to. That's all that's really changed.
And that architect's working off of basically their own personal backlog, and
Right.
that consists of work that's flowing from the team. So their customers are those teams.
That's right.
So the model doesn't actually change. The work flows to the appropriate team.
And then we have all those kinds of people. Like we have a center of excellence for service-oriented architecture. Every single team that we have has an assigned architect. So they always have somebody that they can go to, even if they don't have one that's working with them day by day.
Yeah, plus one. Yeah, so same thing. That architectural backplane is there. It's to address this issue. Right? So.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Michael, Isaac, Damon, Ted. Thanks for coming out today.